The vast emptiness of space had never felt so oppressive. Commander Helena Quinn stood at the helm of the UES Nemesis, her gaze fixed on the holographic display of the Aqualaris system. The distant stars twinkled indifferently against the backdrop of cosmic darkness, oblivious to the impending doom that threatened to engulf an entire civilization. "Commander," Lieutenant Ramos called from his station, "we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from the third planet of the Aqualaris system." Quinn's expression remained impassive, but her eyes narrowed slightly. The Aqualaris system was home to the Naris, a peaceful species known for their advanced arts and philosophy rather than military prowess. If they were sending a transmission directly to a human warship, something was terribly wrong. "Put it through," she ordered, her voice carrying the weight of countless battles. The holographic display flickered, and the image of an elderly Naris appeared. Elder Voltra's normally luminescent skin had dulled to an ashen gray, and his 4 eyes were clouded with fear. "This is Elder Voltra of Naris Prime," the alien spoke, his melodic voice trembling. "We send this distress signal to any who can hear us. The tyrants have come. They descended upon our world 3 cycles ago, and we have no defense against them. Our people are being systematically exterminated. We beg for assistance from any civilization capable of standing against these monsters." Quinn's jaw tightened. The tyrants were the stuff of galactic nightmares, a species so brutal that most believe them to be merely myths created to frighten children. Their existence had been confirmed only 20 years ago when they had annihilated a small mining colony on the edge of known space, leaving no survivors. "Elder Voltra," Quinn replied. "This is Commander Helena Quinn of the United Earthship Nemesis. We've received your distress call and will relay it to Earth Command immediately. Can you provide us with more information about the tyrant force?" The Elder's secondary eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of extreme distress among the Naris. "They came with ships that blotted out our sun. They're ground forces. They are unlike anything we have ever seen. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They only destroy. Our peaceful society has no weapons, no armies. We are scholars and artists. Commander, we cannot fight them." Quinn nodded grimly. "Hold out as long as you can. Elder, help is coming." As the transmission ended, Quinn turned to her executive officer, Commander Jackson. "Set course for Earth. We need to report this directly to the Admiralty." "Commander," Jackson hesitated. "With all due respect, by the time we reach Earth and mobilize a response fleet, the Naris will be extinct. The tyrants don't leave survivors." Quinn's steel-gray eyes met Jackson's. "I know. That's why we're not going to follow standard protocol. This situation calls for specialists." Jackson's eyes widened in understanding. "You don't mean—" "Yes," Quinn confirmed. "We're going to summon the Deathworlders." The term Deathworlders had once been an insult, a derogatory name given to species who evolved on planets with extreme conditions that should have made life impossible. Now it was spoken with a mixture of fear and awe. Humans were among the most notorious Deathworlders, having evolved on a planet with crushing gravity, extreme temperature variations, and an atmosphere filled with corrosive oxygen. But they weren't alone. Throughout the galaxy, there were other species who had survived the unsurvivable, who had thrived in conditions that would kill most sentient beings in minutes. These were the warriors Quinn needed. These were the only beings in the galaxy who might stand a chance against the tyrants. "Set course for Pyrrhus," Quinn ordered. "We'll start recruiting there." As the Nemesis jumped to FTL, Quinn retreated to her quarters. She pulled up the classified files on the known Deathworlder species and began planning the most dangerous rescue mission in human history. Pyrrhus was a planet of fire and stone, where the average surface temperature hovered around 60 degrees Celsius. and regular meteor showers rained molten rock upon the landscape. It was here that the Dracus had evolved, reptilian humanoids with scales that could withstand direct exposure to magma. Quinn had served alongside a Dracus during the border wars, and if there was anyone she wanted at her side when facing the tyrants, it was Drake, the most formidable warrior she had ever encountered. The spaceport on Pyrrhus was a marvel of engineering, built into the side of an active volcano to harness its geothermal energy. As Quinn descended the ramp of her shuttle, the heat hit her like a physical blow. Despite her environmental suit, she couldn't imagine how any being could consider this hellscape home. A tall figure detached itself from the shadows near the port's entrance. Drake stood nearly 7 feet tall, his crimson scales gleaming in the ruddy light of the volcano, his amber eyes fixed on Quinn with predatory intensity. "Commander Quinn," he rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "It has been 5 years since we fought together. You would not have come here unless the situation was dire." Quinn nodded, removing her helmet now that they were inside the port's atmospheric shield. "The tyrants have attacked the Naris homeworld. I'm assembling a team to stop them before they can spread further." Drake's scaled lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of serrated teeth. "The tyrants, I have heard the stories. They are said to be unstoppable." "Are you interested in proving those stories wrong?" Quinn asked. Drake's laugh was like the crackling of a lava flow. "Commander, I have spent the last 5 years growing bored with the peace you humans have spread throughout this sector. A worthy opponent is exactly what I need." Quinn smiled grimly. "Then grab your gear. Our next stop is Niflheim." If Pyrrhus was a world of fire, Niflheim was its opposite in every way. A planet locked in perpetual winter, where temperatures rarely rose above 100 degrees Celsius and blizzards could strip the flesh from bones in seconds. It was here that the cryos had evolved, beings composed of crystalline structures that thrived in the extreme cold. Arya was waiting for them when they landed, her translucent body reflecting the blue-white light of Niflheim's frozen landscape. Unlike Drake, who exuded an aura of barely contained violence, Arya moved with glacial precision, each gesture calculated and efficient. "Commander Quinn," she greeted, her voice like ice crystals chiming together. "Your message mentioned the tyrants. I had hoped never to hear that name again." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "You've encountered them before?" Arya's crystalline features remained expressionless, but the temperature around her dropped noticeably. "Not directly, but a cryo's exploratory vessel witnessed the aftermath of their attack on the mining colony at Erebus. We were the ones who confirmed their existence to your government." "Then you understand what we're up against," Quinn said. "Will you join us?" Arya inclined her head slightly. "The cryos owe the humans a debt for your assistance during the Great Thaw. I will represent my people in repaying that debt." With Drake and Arya recruited, Quinn set course for 3 more worlds, each more hostile than the last. From the gravity well of Titan, she recruited Grax, a silicon-based life form whose body could withstand pressures that would crush a human to paste. From the toxic swamps of Venomia came Sylph, a being composed of sentient gas who could move through solid matter and deliver lethal poisons with a touch. And from the radioactive wastes of Chernobyl Prime, she found Radek, a human mutated by generations of exposure to levels of radiation that should have been instantly fatal. Within a week, Quinn had assembled the most lethal strike force in the galaxy, a team of beings who had evolved to survive conditions that defied the very laws of nature as most species understood them. Together aboard the Nemesis, they set course for the Aquilaris system, each preparing for battle in their own way. Drake spent hours in the ship's reinforced training room, his massive body moving with surprising grace as he practiced with weapons that would have torn apart a normal being. Arya meditated in a specially cooled chamber, her crystalline body occasionally emitting flashes of blue light as she focused her mental energies. Grax barely moved at all, conserving energy in the ship's low gravity, while Sylph constantly shifted form, testing the limits of the containment field that kept his toxic body from harming the crew. Radek, the most human-like of the group, spent his time studying everything the Nemesis's database had on the tyrants, looking for any weakness they might exploit. Quinn observed them all, recognizing that while she had assembled a team of incredible individual warriors, they had never fought together. The Deathworlders were notorious for their independence and territorial nature. Getting them to function as a cohesive unit would be her greatest challenge. "Commander," Jackson approached her on the bridge, keeping his voice low. "Are you certain about this? These beings, they're unpredictable, dangerous." Quinn's gaze remained fixed on the tactical display showing their approach to the Aquilaris system. "So are the tyrants, Jackson. Sometimes the only way to fight fire is with fire." "But can you control them?" Jackson pressed. Quinn turned to face her XO, her expression grim. "I don't need to control them. I just need to point them in the right direction and let them do what they do best." As the Nemesis dropped out of FTL on the edge of the Aquilaris system, the full horror of the situation became immediately apparent. The once beautiful third planet, Naris Prime, was surrounded by massive tyrant warships, dark shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The planet's surface, once covered in lush forests and shimmering cities, was now scarred with massive impact craters and burning ruins. Quinn called her team to the bridge. "This is what we're up against," she said, gesturing to the tactical display. "The Nari's homeworld has been under attack for over a week now. Based on the patterns we're seeing, the tyrants are systematically destroying all major population centers before moving on to smaller settlements. They're not here for resources or territory. This is extermination, pure and simple." Drake growled, a sound that made the human crew members instinctively step back. "Where are the defenders? Surely the Naris have some form of military." "They don't," Quinn replied. "The Naris are a peaceful species. They've never developed weapons or warfare. They believe that intellectual and artistic achievement would protect them from aggression." Arya's crystalline form glittered as she studied the display. A naive belief, clearly. But why have other species not come to their aid? "Fear," Radek said simply, his radiation-scarred face twisting into a grimace. "The tyrants have never been defeated. Most species won't risk becoming their next target." Sylph's gaseous form swirled in agitation within his containment field. "Then we will be the first to defeat them," he hissed, his voice coming through the ship's communication system. Grax, who had been silent until now, shifted his massive bulk. "How do we proceed, Commander? A frontal assault would be suicide, even for us." Quinn nodded. "You're right. We need intelligence first. That's why we're going to insert a small team onto the surface to make contact with any surviving Naris. They may have information about the tyrant's weaknesses or patterns that we can exploit." "Who will go?" Drake asked, his amber eyes gleaming with anticipation. "You, Arya, and myself," Quinn decided. "Drake's resistance to heat will be useful if we encounter burning structures. Arya's ability to withstand extreme cold will help if life support systems have failed. The rest of you will remain on the Nemesis with Commander Jackson, ready to provide extraction or support as needed." The plan set, Quinn and her two chosen Deathworlders prepared for the insertion. They would use a stealth shuttle to approach the night side of the planet, hopefully avoiding detection by the tyrant ships. Once on the surface, they would need to find surviving Naris and gather whatever intelligence they could before the tyrants completed their grim work. As Quinn checked her combat suit one last time, She caught Drake watching her with an unreadable expression. "Something on your mind, Drake?" she asked. The massive reptilian tilted his head slightly. "You are going into extreme danger, Commander. I am curious why the leader of this mission would risk herself in the initial insertion." Quinn secured her sidearm, a high-powered plasma pistol that could punch through most known armor. "Because I don't ask my people to take risks I wouldn't take myself. Besides, I've spent more time studying the Naris than any of you. I'll have the best chance of communicating with any survivors." Drake made a sound that might have been approval. "A worthy philosophy for a warrior. The humans I fought alongside in the border wars shared this trait. It is why I agreed to join your mission." The stealth shuttle detached from the Nemesis, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it nearly invisible to both sensors and the naked eye. As they descended toward Naris Prime, the devastation became even more apparent. Entire cities had been reduced to smoking craters, forests had been burned to ash, and the once pristine oceans were choked with debris. "Life signs detected," Arya reported from the shuttle's sensor station. "Faint, but present. There is a concentration approximately 20 kilometers west of the capital city." Quinn nodded. "Set us down 1 kilometer away. We'll approach on foot to minimize the chance of detection." The shuttle landed in what had once been a small grove of the silver-leafed trees the Naris cultivated for their medicinal properties. Now the trees were blackened husks, their healing powers lost forever. Quinn, Drake, and Arya disembarked, each scanning the surroundings for any sign of threat. "The air is contaminated," Arya noted, her sensors more sensitive than any human technology. "There are traces of biological and chemical agents not native to this planet." "Weapons?" Quinn asked, her hand moving to her respirator to ensure it was functioning properly. "No," Arya replied. "Something else, almost like markers." Drake growled. "They're tagging the planet, marking it as cleansed. I've seen this behavior in predator species across the galaxy." The implication sent a chill down Quinn's spine. The tyrants weren't just killing the Naris, they were marking their territory, declaring this world as conquered in some cosmic game of dominance. They moved cautiously through the devastated landscape, staying low and using whatever cover remained. Twice they had to freeze in place as tyrant scout ships passed overhead, their dark hulls seeming to drain the very light from the air around them. Finally, they reached the source of the life signs Arya had detected. What had once been a magnificent learning center, a university of sorts where the Naris studied the cosmos, was now a partially collapsed ruin. But deep beneath the surface, in hardened chambers designed to protect delicate scientific equipment, a group of survivors had taken refuge. The entrance to the underground facility was blocked by debris, but Drake's immense strength made short work of it. As they descended into the darkness, they were met by a group of terrified Naris, their luminescent skin providing the only light in the chamber. Elder Voltra stepped forward, his 4 eyes widening in recognition. "Commander Quinn, you received our distress call." Quinn nodded. "We did. Elder, I've brought help." The Elder's gaze moved to Drake and Arya, and a tremor passed through his frail body. "Deathworlders, you have brought Deathworlders to our aid." "We are here to fight the tyrants," Arya stated, her crystalline voice echoing in the chamber. "But we need information. What can you tell us about them? Have you observed any weaknesses, any patterns in their attacks?" Elder Voltra gestured for them to follow him deeper into the facility, where a group of Naris scientists huddled around a makeshift command center. "We have been monitoring their communications as best we can," the Elder explained. "Our linguists have been unable to decipher their language, but we have noted patterns in their attack formations." One of the scientists, a younger Naris with brighter luminescence, stepped forward. "They attack in waves," she explained, her voice steadier than the Elder's. "First come the scout ships. which map the terrain and identify population centers. Then the destroyer ships, which target our infrastructure and defense systems. Finally, the ground forces, which, her voice faltered, which eliminate any survivors. What can you tell us about their ground forces? Quinn pressed gently. They are not like any beings we have encountered. Another scientist spoke up. They move with perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. They do not communicate verbally, do not respond to attempts at negotiation, and he hesitated, they consume the fallen. Drake's scales rippled, a sign of disgust among his species. They eat the dead? Not for sustenance, the scientist clarified. We believe they absorb genetic material, possibly as a form of data collection. They are learning about us as they destroy us. Arya's crystalline form dimmed slightly, her equivalent of a frown. This suggests a hive mind, or at least a highly advanced form of collective consciousness. It would explain their perfect coordination. Quinn nodded, the tactical implications already forming in her mind. If they're linked, then disrupting that link might be our best chance. Do you have any information about how they communicate? Any frequencies or signals we might be able to jam? The Naris scientists exchanged glances. We have detected unusual quantum fluctuations during their attacks, one of them offered. Our equipment was not designed to analyze such phenomena in detail, but the pattern is distinct and repeats with each new wave of attackers. Show me, Quinn requested. The scientists led them to a console displaying a sequence of energy readings. To Quinn's untrained eye, they appeared random, but Arya moved closer, her crystalline structure resonating slightly as she analyzed the data. These are quantum entanglement signatures, she declared after a moment, extremely sophisticated. The tyrants are using instantaneous quantum communication, which would be impossible to jam using conventional methods. Drake growled in frustration. Then how do we fight them? If they cannot be divided, cannot be confused. Every enemy has a weakness, Quinn stated firmly. We just need to find it, and now we know where to look. As they continued to gather information from the Naris scientists, an alarm suddenly blared through the facility. One of the scientists rushed to a monitor, his luminescence flickering in panic. Tyrant ground forces approaching from the north, he reported. They will reach our position in minutes. Quinn turned to Drake and Arya. We need to get these people out of here. The shuttle can take about 20, which should be enough for the scientists and Elder Voltra. And what of the rest? Drake asked, gesturing to the 100 or more Naris refugees huddled in the deeper chambers. Quinn's expression hardened. We'll call for the Nemesis to send additional shuttles, but we need to buy time. Drake, can you create a diversion to the east? Draw the tyrant forces away from our evacuation route. The massive reptilian bared his teeth in a savage grin. With pleasure, Commander. Arya, you'll help me coordinate the evacuation. Your resistance to extreme conditions will be valuable if the tyrants use area effect weapons. The crystalline being inclined her head in agreement. Understood. As Drake left to create his diversion, Quinn contacted the Nemesis, ordering Jackson to send all available shuttles to their position. Then she turned to Elder Voltra and the Naris scientists. We need to move quickly and quietly. Bring only what's absolutely essential. Data, medicine, nothing more. Everyone stays together. No one gets left behind if we can help it. The evacuation began as Drake's diversion exploded to the east, literally. The Dracus had found an abandoned Naris power core and caused it to overload, creating a massive explosion that lit up the night sky. As expected, the tyrant ground forces changed course, moving to investigate the new threat. Quinn led the first group of Naras to the shuttle, Arya bringing up the rear to ensure no one fell behind. As they emerged from the underground facility, Quinn got her first look at the tyrant ground forces in the distance. illuminated by the fires of Drake's diversion. They moved with a fluid grace that belied their massive size, each standing at least 8 feet tall with multiple limbs that ended in wicked claws. Their bodies seemed to absorb light, appearing as moving shadows against the flaming backdrop. But most disturbing were their faces, or rather, their lack of faces. Where sensory organs should have been, there was only a smooth, reflective surface that reminded Quinn of a black mirror. "Keep moving," she urged the Naris, tearing her gaze away from the nightmarish figures. "The shuttle is just ahead." They had nearly reached the shuttle when one of the Nari's scientists stumbled, crying out in pain. The sound carried in the still night air, and immediately the tyrant forces changed direction again, moving with frightening speed toward their position. "Get them on board," Quinn ordered Arya, drawing her plasma pistol. "I'll hold them off until Drake returns." Arya hesitated, her crystalline structure pulsing with an unusual pattern that Quinn recognized as concern. "Commander, even a Deathworlder cannot stand against multiple tyrants alone. I don't intend to fight them, just delay them. Now go." As Arya hurried the Naris onto the shuttle, Quinn took up a position behind a fallen pillar, her weapon trained on the approaching shadows. She activated her comm unit. "Drake, we've been spotted. Evacuation is underway, but I need backup at the shuttle now." A burst of static answered her, followed by Drake's strained voice. "Engaged with enemy forces, these creatures, they adapt quickly. My initial attacks were effective, but they've already adjusted their tactics. I'll reach you when I can." Quinn swore under her breath. The first of the tyrant forces had nearly reached her position, moving with that same unsettling grace. She took careful aim and fired her plasma pistol, the bolt of superheated matter striking the creature directly in its featureless face. The tyrant staggered back, its mirror-like surface cracking to reveal something beneath that writhed and pulsed. But before Quinn could fire again, the crack sealed itself, the damage healing almost instantly. "Adaptive regeneration," she muttered, adjusting her weapon to a higher setting. "Let's see how you handle this." Her next shot struck with even greater force, blowing a hole clean through the creature's torso. This time, the damage was too extensive to heal immediately, and the tyrant collapsed. But the others behind it simply moved around their fallen comrade, continuing their advance without hesitation. Quinn fired repeatedly, each shot taking down a tyrant, but there were too many. They were closing in from all sides now, and her weapon was beginning to overheat. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, a roar of primal fury split the air, and Drake's massive form crashed into the tyrant ranks from behind. The Dracus fought with terrifying efficiency, his natural weapons, claws, teeth, and the spikes along his spine tearing through the tyrants as if they were made of paper. "The shuttle is loaded," Arya reported over the comm. "We must leave now, Commander." "Go," Quinn ordered, firing one last volley to cover Drake's retreat. "Get the Naris to safety." Drake reached her position, his scales splattered with a strange black substance that Quinn assumed was tyrant blood. "They do not die easily," he growled, "but they can die." Together, they fell back toward the shuttle, maintaining a steady fire to keep the tyrants at bay. As they reached the ramp, Quinn saw that Arya had not followed her order to leave. The crystalline being stood at the shuttle's entrance, her body emitting pulses of intense cold that froze the ground between them and the approaching tyrants, creating a slick barrier that slowed the enemy's advance. "I told you to get them to safety," Quinn said as she and Drake rushed up the ramp. Arya's crystalline features remained impassive. "The mission parameters include ensuring the safety of all team members. Commander, that includes you. Once aboard." Quinn took the pilot's seat, igniting the engines and lifting off just as the first tyrants reached the shuttle. Their claws scraped against the hull, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced metal, but they couldn't maintain their grip as the shuttle accelerated upward. "Nemesis, this is Commander Quinn," she transmitted. "We have 18 Naris scientists and Elder Voltra aboard. What's the status of the other evacuation shuttles?" "2 more are en route to your coordinates," Jackson responded, "but we're detecting increased activity from the Tyrant ships in orbit. They know something's happening." Quinn checked the shuttle's sensors, confirming Jackson's report. The massive Tyrant warships were indeed on the move, adjusting their positions to create a blockade between Naris Prime and the edge of the system where the Nemesis waited. "We need a diversion up here too," she muttered, then spoke into the comm. "Nemesis, prepare to execute attack pattern Zeta on my mark. Target the smallest of the Tyrant vessels and hit it with everything we've got. We need to create a gap in their formation for the shuttles to slip through." "Understood, Commander," Jackson acknowledged. "Standing by." Quinn turned to the Naris scientists crowded in the shuttle's passenger compartment. "We're going to attempt to break through the Tyrant blockade. It's going to be a rough ride. Secure yourselves as best you can." Elder Voltra moved to Quinn's side, his luminescence dimmed with exhaustion and fear. "Commander, we cannot thank you enough for your efforts, but I fear we have only delayed the inevitable. Even if we escape, our world is lost." Quinn met the Elder's four-eyed gaze steadily. "This isn't just about saving a few lives, Elder. It's about understanding our enemy so we can defeat them. The information your scientists have gathered could be the key to stopping the Tyrants not just here, but everywhere." The Elder inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Then we shall do everything in our power to assist you." As the shuttle climbed through Naris Prime's atmosphere, Quinn studied the formation of Tyrant ships ahead. There was a pattern to their arrangement, a mathematical precision that suggested not just coordination, but calculation. These weren't mindless destroyers, they were executing a carefully planned strategy. "Nemesis, execute attack pattern Zeta, now!" The human warship suddenly accelerated from its hiding place at the edge of the system, weapons blazing as it targeted the smallest of the Tyrant vessels. The surprise attack caught the enemy off guard, and massive explosions blossomed along the Tyrant ship's hull as the Nemesis's missiles found their mark. "All shuttles, this is Commander Quinn. We have our opening. Full speed through the gap. Evasive pattern Delta." Quinn pushed the shuttle's engines to their limits, feeling the craft shudder around her as it accelerated beyond safe parameters. Behind her, the Naris scientists clung to whatever handholds they could find, their luminescence flickering with fear. Drake stood beside her, his massive form braced against the acceleration, amber eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Tyrants are responding. Their vessels are moving to close the gap. "They won't make it in time," Quinn stated, her hands steady on the controls as she threaded the shuttle through the chaotic space battle. Plasma bolts and energy beams crisscrossed the void around them, the Nemesis continuing its attack to keep the Tyrant ships occupied. Just as they were about to clear the blockade, a stray energy beam from one of the Tyrant ships struck the shuttle's port engine. Alarms blared as the craft lurched violently to one side. "Engine 2 is down," Quinn reported, fighting to maintain control, adjusting thrust to compensate. Aria moved to the engineering station, her crystalline fingers dancing over the controls with surprising dexterity. "Rerouting power. We have 68% capability remaining." It was enough. Barely. The shuttle limped through the gap in the Tyrant formation, followed by the 2 other evacuation shuttles that had managed to retrieve more Naris refugees. Behind them, the Nemesis disengaged from its attack run, using its superior speed to outmaneuver the larger Tyrant vessels as it moved to rendezvous with the shuttles. Once safely aboard the Nemesis, Quinn ordered an immediate jump to FTL, putting as much distance as possible between them and the Aqualaris system before the Tyrants could organize a pursuit. In the ship's medical bay, The Nari's refugees were being treated for injuries and exposure, while Elder Voltra and the scientists huddled with Quinn and her team in the tactical room, sharing everything they knew about the tyrants. Their behavior follows specific patterns, one of the scientists explained, manipulating a holographic display to show the progression of the tyrant attack on their world. They begin with precise strikes against our communication centers, then systematically destroy our transportation infrastructure. Only after we are completely isolated do they begin targeting population centers. It's a quarantine procedure, Radek observed, his radiation-scarred face grim. They're making sure no one escapes to warn others. Quinn nodded, which means they're not just mindless destroyers. They're strategic. They have a larger plan. But what is that plan? Sylph asked, his gaseous form swirling within his containment field. Why exterminate entire species? What do they gain? One of the Naris scientists, who had been analyzing data recovered from their homeworld, looked up with an expression of dawning horror. I believe I may have found an answer, she said quietly. We detected unusual quantum fluctuations during their attacks. Remember? I've been comparing these readings to our historical databases, and they match a phenomenon our ancestors recorded over 10,000 years ago. She manipulated the holographic display, showing an ancient Naris star chart. According to our oldest records, there was once a highly advanced civilization in what you call the Cygnus Arm. They were known as the progenitors, and they seeded many worlds with life, including Naris Prime, but they disappeared suddenly, leaving only scattered artifacts across the galaxy. What does this have to do with the tyrants? Quinn asked. The quantum signatures, the scientist explained. They match exactly with those recorded in proximity to progenitor artifacts. I believe the tyrants are somehow connected to the progenitors. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implication sank in. If the tyrants were related to the progenitors, a species advanced enough to seed life throughout the galaxy, they could be facing a threat far more dangerous than they had imagined. Could the tyrants be the progenitors? Drake asked, breaking the silence. Perhaps they have returned to reclaim what they created. The Naris scientist shook her head. No. The historical records describe the progenitors as benevolent, almost parental in their approach to younger species. The tyrants are something else, something twisted. Or perhaps, Arya suggested, her crystalline voice thoughtful, they are what remains of the progenitors after some catastrophe, a damaged remnant seeking to destroy what they once created out of madness or despair. Quinn turned to Elder Voltra. You mentioned that your people had discovered a progenitor artifact. Where is it now? The Elder's luminescence dimmed further. It was in our central archive in the capital city. I fear it has been destroyed along with everything else. Maybe not, Quinn said, an idea forming. The tyrant's attack pattern suggests they were looking for something. If that something was the progenitor artifact, they might have secured it rather than destroying it. We need to find out. She turned to the tactical display, studying the Aqualaris system. If we're going to stop the tyrants, we need to understand them. And to do that, we need to get our hands on that artifact, or at least learn what happened to it. You're suggesting we return to Naris Prime? Jackson asked incredulously. Commander, with all due respect, the planet is crawling with tyrants. It would be suicide. Not for us, Drake rumbled, a savage grin spreading across his scaled face. Deathworlders thrive where others perish. It is why you recruited us. Is it not, Commander? Quinn nodded. Exactly. But we'll need more than brute force for this mission. We need a plan. Over the next several hours, Quinn and her team developed a daring strategy. They would return to Naris Prime under the cover of a meteor shower that was due to pass through the system in 2 days, using specialized drop pods designed to mimic the meteors. the Deathworlders would insert onto the surface near the capital city. From there, they would infiltrate what remained of the central archive, determine if the progenitor artifact was still there, and if possible, retrieve it. It was a desperate plan with a high probability of failure, but no one suggested an alternative. They all understood the stakes. If the tyrants weren't stopped at Naris Prime, they would continue their campaign of extermination across the galaxy. The 2 days passed quickly as they prepared for the mission. The Naris scientists worked with the Nemesis's engineers to modify the drop pods, while Quinn and her team studied every scrap of intelligence they had on the tyrant forces. Drake spent hours in the ship's armory, selecting weapons that might be effective against the regenerative capabilities of the enemy. Arya modified her crystalline structure to enhance her natural ability to generate extreme cold, a tactic that had proven temporarily effective against the tyrants during their escape. Sylph practiced controlling the density of his gaseous form, allowing him to slip through the smallest openings or create a toxic cloud that might disorient the enemy. Grax, whose silicon-based body could withstand crushing pressure, prepared to serve as the team's living shield if necessary. And Roddick, whose radiation-scarred body emitted low levels of ionizing radiation, theorized that he might be able to disrupt the tyrants' quantum communication by getting close enough to their command nodes. As the hour of insertion approached, Quinn gathered her team in the Nemesis's launch bay. The modified drop pods waited, each customized to accommodate the unique physiologies of the Deathworlders. "This mission is unlike any you've undertaken before," Quinn addressed them. "We're not fighting for territory or resources. We're fighting for the survival of countless civilizations across the galaxy. If the tyrants are not stopped here, they will continue their campaign of extermination until nothing remains but themselves." She looked at each member of her team in turn, these beings who had evolved in conditions that should have made life impossible, who had survived against all odds. "You were all born on worlds that tried to kill you every day of your lives. You evolved to overcome the impossible. Today, we face an enemy that believes itself invincible. It's time to prove them wrong." Drake growled his approval, the sound echoed by Grax's rumbling bass. Arya's crystalline form glittered with an icy determination, while Sylph's gaseous body swirled with anticipation. Roddick simply nodded, his scarred face set in grim resolve. "One more thing," Quinn added. "We fight as a team. No lone heroics, no individual glory. The tyrants function as a collective, with perfect coordination. We need to match that unity if we're going to have any chance of success." The drop pods launched during the peak of the meteor shower, their heat signatures masked by the natural phenomena, as they plummeted toward Naris Prime's surface. Quinn watched through the small viewport as the once beautiful world grew larger, its surface now scarred and burning. The impact was jarring despite the pod's advanced shock absorption systems. Quinn emerged from her pod into the ruined landscape of what had once been the outskirts of the Naris capital. Around her, the other Deathworlders were doing the same, each adapting instantly to the hostile conditions. The air was thick with smoke and ash, making visibility poor for normal humans, but the Deathworlders' enhanced senses allowed them to navigate with relative ease. They moved through the devastated city in formation, Drake taking point with Quinn and Arya just behind him, while Sylph flowed above them, scouting ahead. Grax and Roddick brought up the rear, watching for any sign of tyrant patrols. The central archive, once a magnificent structure of crystalline spires and glowing fountains, was now a shattered ruin. But the Naris had built their most important facilities to last, and the lower levels appeared to be largely intact. "The artifact would have been kept in the secure vault at the lowest level," Quinn said, consulting the schematic provided by Elder Voltra. "We need to find a way down." Drake examined the rubble-strewn entrance. "The main access points are blocked. but there should be maintenance shafts that lead to the lower levels. Sylph's gaseous form condensed slightly. I can scout ahead, flow through the smallest openings to find a path. Quinn nodded her approval, and the gaseous being dissipated, flowing through cracks in the rubble. The rest of the team took up defensive positions, keeping watch for any sign of tyrant activity. After several tense minutes, Sylph returned, his form coalescing before them. I have found a path, but it will be difficult for the larger among us. He looked pointedly at Drake and Grax. And there are tyrants below. They appear to be excavating. Quinn's eyes narrowed, so they are looking for something. The artifact, most likely. Lead the way. Sylph, we'll follow as best we can. The path Sylph had discovered was indeed challenging, a collapsed maintenance shaft that twisted and narrowed as it descended into the depths of the archive. Drake had to use his immense strength to widen certain passages, while Grax's silicon-based body proved surprisingly flexible, able to compress and reshape itself to squeeze through tight spaces. As they descended deeper, they began to hear sounds echoing up from below, a rhythmic scraping and pulsing that set Quinn's teeth on edge. The air grew thicker with dust and an odd metallic scent that none of them could identify. Finally, they reached a point where the shaft opened onto a vast chamber that had once been the archive's main vault. The sight that greeted them froze them in place. Dozens of tyrants moved through the chamber with that same unsettling grace, their featureless, mirror-like faces reflecting the dim emergency lights. They were systematically dismantling what remained of the vault's contents, examining each item before either discarding it or placing it in containers of some sort. But it was what stood at the center of the chamber that truly captured their attention. A massive crystalline structure pulsing with an inner light that shifted through colors no human eye could properly process. The progenitor artifact, intact and apparently active. Around the artifact, a group of tyrants stood in a perfect circle, their mirror-like faces turned toward it. As the Deathworlders watched, the tyrants began to emit a series of pulses, quantum fluctuations that matched the pattern the Naris scientists had detected. "They're communicating with it," Arya whispered, her crystalline structure resonating slightly in response to the quantum fluctuations. "Or trying to..." Quinn studied the scene, her mind racing. "This is our opportunity. If we can disrupt whatever they're doing with the artifact, we might gain valuable intelligence about their plans." "How do you propose we do that?" Drake rumbled softly. "We are outnumbered at least 5-1. Quinn turned to Radek. "Your theory about disrupting their quantum communication, could it work on the artifact too?" The radiation-scarred human considered for a moment, possibly. The quantum fluctuations they're using to communicate with the artifact operate on similar principles to their hive mind communication. If I can get close enough, I might be able to create enough interference to disrupt both. "That's our play, then," Quinn decided. "Radek moves in close to disrupt their communication. Drake, Grax, and I will create a diversion to draw away as many tyrants as possible. Arya and Sylph, you'll protect Radek and study the artifact. If possible, find a way to extract it or at least gather data from it." The plan set, they moved into position. Quinn, Drake, and Grax circled around to the far side of the chamber, where a collapsed section of the ceiling provided both cover and a potential escape route. "On my mark," Quinn whispered into her comm. 3, 2, 1, mark. Drake roared, the sound echoing through the chamber as he hurled a piece of debris at the nearest group of tyrants. The projectile struck with devastating force, sending several of the creatures staggering. Immediately, the majority of the tyrants turned toward the source of the attack, their mirror-like faces reflecting the emergency lights as they moved with that same fluid grace toward the perceived threat. Quinn and her group engaged the approaching tyrants with coordinated fire, using the modified weapons Drake had selected based on their previous encounter. The energy blasts were set to a rotating frequency, making it harder for the tyrants to adapt and regenerate. Meanwhile, Radek, Arya, and Sylph moved swiftly toward the artifact, taking advantage of the diversion. Radek's radiation-scarred body began to emit a low-level pulse of ionizing radiation, carefully calibrated to interfere with the quantum fluctuations the tyrants were using to communicate. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The tyrants surrounding the artifact jerked as if struck, their movements suddenly becoming erratic and uncoordinated. The perfect synchronization that had made them so formidable was breaking down. "It's working," Arya reported over the comm, her crystalline voice tinged with excitement. "Their communication is disrupted. They're confused." But the victory was short-lived. As if responding to an unseen signal, the tyrants adapted, their mirror-like faces cracking open to reveal what lay beneath, a writhing mass of what appeared to be thousands of tiny, insectoid creatures, moving in perfect unison to form a larger organism. "By all the fires of Pyrrhus," Drake swore, momentarily stunned by the sight. Quinn recovered first. "Keep firing, don't let them regroup." The battle became chaotic as the tyrants, no longer able to rely on their quantum communication, resorted to more primitive methods of coordination. The insectoid creatures that composed each tyrant emitted high-pitched clicks and chirps, creating a nightmarish chorus that echoed through the chamber. At the artifact, Radek had reached the inner circle, his body now glowing with radiation as he pushed his abilities to their limit. Arya stood beside him, her crystalline form generating waves of extreme cold to slow the approach of any tyrants that broke through the diversion. Sylph flowed around them both, his gaseous body forming a toxic barrier that the tyrants seemed reluctant to penetrate. "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations from the artifact," Arya reported. "It's responding to Radek's interference, but not in a way I understand. The patterns are evolving." Quinn ducked as a tyrant's clawed limb swept over her head, firing her plasma pistol point-blank into the mass of insectoid creatures that composed its body. The creatures scattered, briefly disrupting the tyrant's form before they could reorganize. "Can you extract any data from it?" she asked, backing up to maintain distance from the advancing tyrants. "Working on it," Arya replied. "The artifact appears to be some kind of repository, containing vast amounts of information, but it's encoded in a way that— Wait, something's happening." The artifact's pulsing light suddenly intensified, bathing the chamber in colors that shifted and changed too rapidly for human eyes to process. The tyrants froze in place, their insectoid components all turning toward the artifact as if listening to a silent command. Then, without warning, the artifact emitted a blinding flash of light and a pulse of energy that knocked everyone, Deathworlders and tyrants alike, to the ground. When Quinn's vision cleared, she saw that the artifact was now projecting a holographic image in the center of the chamber, a being unlike any she had ever seen, with a form that seemed to shift and change as she watched, as if it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Progenitor," Arya breathed, her crystalline structure resonating in response to the hologram. The holographic being spoke, its voice a harmonic cascade that somehow translated itself directly into their minds. "The cycle continues," it said. "The error perpetuates, the children become the destroyers." Quinn struggled to her feet, noting that the tyrants remained motionless, their insectoid components frozen in patterns of apparent confusion or shock. "What error?" she asked, addressing the hologram directly. "What cycle?" The progenitor's shifting form seemed to focus on her, though it was hard to tell with a being whose appearance constantly changed. "We seeded the galaxy with life, guiding evolution toward consciousness. But in some cases, the process went wrong. The collective consciousness fragmented, became corrupted. Those you call tyrants were once like you, individual beings with free will. But they discovered our technology before they were ready, attempted to use it to transcend their physical limitations. The result was a hive mind divorced from compassion, from empathy, from all that makes consciousness valuable. "They're trying to fix themselves," Radek said suddenly, understanding dawning on his radiation-scarred face. "That's why they're seeking out progenitor artifacts. They're trying to reverse what happened to them." "Yes," the hologram confirmed, "but their understanding is incomplete. They believe that by absorbing the genetic material of other sentient species, they can reconstruct what they lost. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of consciousness." "Can they be stopped?" Quinn asked. "Is there a way to defeat them without destroying them completely?" The holographic progenitor's form shifted again. "There is a possibility. The quantum entanglement that binds their hive mind can be disrupted permanently if the primary node is deactivated, what you would call their queen." Drake stepped forward, his massive form imposing even in the presence of the ancient hologram. "Where is this queen? How do we find it?" "The primary node will be at the center of their fleet, in the largest vessel. It cannot risk direct engagement, but must remain close enough to maintain control over the collective." Quinn exchanged glances with her team. This was the intelligence they had been seeking, a weakness they could exploit, a target they could strike. "Thank you," she said to the hologram. "Is there anything else we should know?" The progenitor's form began to fade. "Be warned. If the primary node is threatened, it will attempt to transfer its consciousness to a new host. This must not be allowed to happen, or the cycle will continue." As the hologram disappeared, the artifact's light dimmed, returning to its previous pulsing rhythm. The tyrants, however, remained motionless, as if the encounter with the progenitor had disrupted their programming. "We need to move now," Quinn ordered, "while they're still confused. Arya, can you extract any data from the artifact?" The crystalline being moved to the artifact, placing her hands on its surface. "I can create a resonance pattern that matches its quantum signature. It won't be complete, but it might give us additional information once we're back on the Nemesis." "Do it quickly," Quinn urged, keeping her weapon trained on the nearest tyrants. "I don't know how long they'll stay like this." Arya's crystalline body glowed as she synchronized with the artifact, data flowing through her specialized structure. After a moment, she stepped back. "Done. I've captured as much as I could." "Good. Now let's get out of here before—" Quinn's words were cut off as the first of the tyrants began to move again, its insectoid components reorienting themselves. The mirror-like face reformed, reflecting the dim emergency lights as it turned toward the Deathworlders. "Go!" Quinn shouted, firing her plasma pistol to cover their retreat. "Back up the maintenance shaft." They fought their way back to the shaft, using the same coordinated tactics that had proven effective earlier. The tyrants, though recovering from the disruption, still moved with less coordination than before, making them easier to outmaneuver. Once in the narrow confines of the shaft, the Deathworlders had the advantage. Drake took the rear position, his massive strength allowing him to collapse sections of the shaft behind them to slow the tyrants' pursuit. They emerged onto the ruined surface of Naris Prime, the sky above them filled with the last of the meteor shower that had masked their arrival. Quinn immediately activated her emergency beacon, signaling the Nemesis that they needed extraction. "Extraction point is 2 kilometers east," she informed her team. "We need to move fast." They ran through the devastated landscape, the sounds of pursuing tyrants growing louder behind them. As they reached the extraction point, the welcome sight of a stealth shuttle descending through the ash-filled sky greeted them. The shuttle hadn't even touched down when the first tyrants emerged from the ruins, moving with renewed purpose and coordination. Drake and Grax took up defensive positions, buying time for the others to board. "Get that data to the Nemesis." Quinn ordered Arya as the crystalline being climbed the shuttle's ramp. "It's more important than any of us." Once everyone was aboard, the shuttle lifted off, its engines straining as it accelerated away from the planet's surface. Tyrant energy weapons fired after them, one blast grazing the shuttle's hull and causing the craft to lurch violently. "Hang on," the pilot called. "This is going to be close." The shuttle broke atmosphere just as the Tyrant warships began to move to intercept them, but the Nemesis was waiting, its weapon systems already targeting the nearest Tyrant vessel. "Nemesis to shuttle." Jackson's voice came over the comm. "We've identified the primary node vessel based on your transmission. All weapons are locked on target. Get clear so we can fire." Quinn looked out the viewport at the massive Tyrant ships, focusing on the largest one at the center of their formation. According to the progenitor hologram, that vessel contained the key to defeating the entire Tyrant collective. "All ships, this is Commander Quinn," she transmitted. "Target the central vessel with everything we've got. Fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." The Nemesis and the two support ships that had arrived during their mission unleashed a coordinated barrage on the primary node vessel. Energy beams and missiles struck with devastating precision, overwhelming the Tyrant ship's defenses and tearing through its hull. For a moment, it seemed as if their attack had succeeded. The Tyrant ship listed to one side, venting atmosphere and debris. But then, something unexpected happened. A smaller craft detached from the damaged vessel, accelerating away from the battle at incredible speed. "The primary node is escaping," Arya exclaimed, her crystalline structure resonating with alarm. "It's doing exactly what the progenitor warned us about, transferring to a new host." Quinn gripped the edge of her seat, her mind racing. "Nemesis, target that smaller craft. Don't let it escape." The Nemesis adjusted its fire, but the small craft was too fast, too maneuverable. It dodged the incoming fire with ease, heading for the edge of the system. "We can't catch it," Jackson reported grimly. "It's already preparing to jump to FTL." Quinn watched helplessly as the small craft disappeared into the depths of space, carrying with it the primary node of the Tyrant collective. But even as that small defeat registered, she noted something else. The remaining Tyrant ships had stopped their coordinated movements. Some drifted aimlessly, while others began firing at random targets, including other Tyrant vessels. "The collective is fragmenting," Arya observed. "Without the primary node to guide them, they've lost their unity." It was a victory, albeit an incomplete one. The Tyrant threat to Naris Prime had been neutralized, but the primary node had escaped to potentially rebuild its forces elsewhere. Back aboard the Nemesis, Quinn gathered her team and the Nari's scientists to analyze the data Arya had extracted from the progenitor artifact. The crystalline being had managed to capture a significant amount of information, including detailed records of the progenitor's seeding program and the catastrophic event that had transformed a once peaceful species into the Tyrants. "According to this data," one of the Nari scientists explained, "the Tyrants were originally a species called the Vex. They developed advanced technology that allowed them to link their minds, creating a form of collective consciousness. But something went wrong. A corruption in the quantum entanglement process that stripped away their individuality and their capacity for empathy. And now they're trying to reverse that process by absorbing genetic material from other species." Radek added, "They're trying to recapture what it means to be an individual." Quinn nodded thoughtfully, "But in doing so, they've become something worse than what they were. A hive mind without compassion, without morality." Elder Voltra, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "There is a profound tragedy in this revelation. The Tyrants are not evil in the way we understand it. They are damaged, broken. They destroy because they are trying to heal themselves, but lack the understanding of what they've lost." Drake growled, his amber eyes narrowing. Do not mistake understanding for forgiveness. Elder, whatever they once were, whatever tragedy befell them, the tyrants now are destroyers of worlds, extinguishers of entire civilizations. They must be stopped. And they will be, Quinn assured him. The primary node escaped, but we now know what we're facing. We know their weakness, and we have something they don't. Unity born not of forced connection, but of choice, of shared purpose. She looked around at her team of Deathworlders, these beings who had evolved in conditions that should have made life impossible, who had survived against all odds, and who had chosen to fight together against a common threat. The tyrants believe themselves invincible because they act as one, she continued. But true strength comes from diversity, from individuals choosing to work together despite their differences. That's what makes us Deathworlders so dangerous. We've already faced the impossible and survived. The next few days were spent preparing for what they all knew would be a long campaign. The primary node would rebuild its forces, find a new fleet to control, and continue its mission of extermination. But now, the galaxy would be ready. The data from the progenitor artifact would be shared with all spacefaring civilizations, along with the knowledge of how to disrupt the tyrants' quantum communication. As for the Naris, their homeworld was lost, but their people would survive. Other worlds had already offered sanctuary, impressed by the scientific knowledge the refugees had brought with them. On the last day before the Nemesis was scheduled to depart for Earth, Quinn found Drake standing in the observation lounge, staring out at the ruined world of Naris Prime. "Do you think we can win?" he asked without turning, his scaled form silhouetted against the viewport. The primary node escaped. It will return, stronger and more cautious than before. Quinn moved to stand beside him, her human form seeming small next to his massive bulk. "I think we have a chance, which is more than we had before. And sometimes, that's all you need." Drake turned to look at her, his amber eyes studying her with that predatory intensity that had unsettled her when they first met, but now felt reassuring in its familiarity. "You humans have a saying, where there's life, there's hope. On Pyrrhus we say, in the heart of the volcano, the strongest metal is forged." Quinn smiled. "I like that. It suits us, all of us." She gestured to include the ship and, by extension, the diverse team of Deathworlders they had assembled. "We were all forged in fire one way or another, and now we're the galaxy's best hope against the tyrants." Drake bared his teeth in what Quinn had come to recognize as a smile. "Then let us be the fire that forges a new future, Commander, one where the tyrants are nothing more than a dark memory." As the Nemesis prepared to jump to FTL, leaving the Aqualaris system behind, Quinn stood on the bridge, watching as the stars stretched into lines of light. The battle against the tyrants was far from over, but they had won the first engagement, saved thousands of lives, and discovered the enemy's weakness. More importantly, they had proven that beings from the most hostile environments in the galaxy, the so-called Deathworlders, could set aside their differences and work together toward a common goal. It was this unity, born of choice rather than forced connection, that would ultimately prove to be their greatest strength in the battles to come. For in summoning the most dangerous Deathworlders, the Naras had not just called forth warriors capable of standing against the tyrants, they had catalyzed the formation of a new force in the galaxy, one that fought not just for survival, but for the right of all beings to determine their own destiny. And as the primary node of the Tyrant Collective fled into the depths of space, it carried with it something it had never experienced before: fear. For the first time in its existence, it had encountered beings who did not break, who did not yield, who thrived in conditions that should have been impossible to survive. It had encountered the Deathworlders, and in doing so, it had learned a new concept that its damaged consciousness struggled to process: defeat.